Hey, good morning, folks, and welcome to the Morning Route Podcast. I am your host, Shane Johnson. And with me today, I have a special guest from up north, Minnesota. Kayla is a special ed, if I can say it this way, a guru. Knows all things special ed, been doing it a long, long time. But Kayla, if you would introduce yourself to our guest here this morning.
Oh, good morning, and thank you, Shane, for having me on this morning. I'm Kayla Henkensiefken, and right now I work in the Bemidji School District. I'm the special transportation manager for the district and have been here since 2016.
So, all right. Well, thank you for the introduction. And the last name, you and I were talking offline here before we hopped on. Kind of say that fast 3 times in a row. I think most people would struggle with that. So, thanks for letting me punt on that one, Kayla, and you taking it. So I appreciate that. So you've been doing this a long time, and we're going to get into some nuts and bolts of special ed. But if you would, again, we were talking offline about this, and I found it really interesting. And I asked you, how did you hear about or find the Morning Route podcast, if you would?
So I was on Facebook one day and I seen Bethany had posted about watching for an upcoming podcast that she was going to be on. So I went online right away to find it and started listening to the ones you had already recorded and just got so excited about it.
Well, thank you for seeing that, posting, looking into it, and finding us here. And I'll say too, because this is important. You reached out and said, "Hey, I love the podcast, love what you're doing. I'm going to share it with some other folks." But there was a subject matter or two in one of them that I had a guest on. We were talking about, and we were close to being right on a couple things, and there was some HIPAA things that we were talking about, and all the acronyms that schools like to use, and you brought some clarification there that we're going to get into today. And I wanted again to say thank you for that, because again, if we don't get something exactly right, and there's somebody out there that hears it, I really want that feedback. Make sure that we're getting the right information out there. Like you said, it wasn't that we were wrong, but maybe we just weren't exactly where we need to be. So you're going to clarify a couple things today. Bring some new things as well here today too for our guests. So I appreciate that. So let's just get into to the meat here again. Special ed. You are a guru of special ed. I've admitted this before to folks. It's probably my kryptonite. There's just so many things with special ed that maybe you think you know, but you don't, and it changes a lot, as we know. So let's talk about that, and maybe just start with that, like the changes throughout the years, Kayla. Maybe a few high points that, hey, I've seen these changes, and where we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago to where we're at today. What are a few things that strike you?
So I've seen a lot of changes, and just so that you know a little bit more of my history, I started out as a school bus driver working for Reichert Bus back in the 80s. And I fell in love with transportation. And the special ed part of it, I just kind of fell into. So I've seen a lot of changes, not only on the gen ed bus side, but the special ed bus side. Compartmentalization is one of them. How compartmentalization has changed in our buses from the fiberglass seats with the metal bar to the thick padding, high backs, the camera systems in the buses. When I first started in the business, there weren't any cameras in the buses. And then we moved to cameras that were in the box, and you never knew if there was a camera in there or not.
The light would
To
just stay on, right? And the kids thought the camera was on, and yeah.
Exactly. And drivers being afraid that Big Brother was watching them, that you're gonna be looking to see what I've done wrong. And I think that culture has changed so much that now the drivers come in and say, "Can you pull the video and take a look at this?" And that's not only on the general ed bus side of it, but also on the special ed side of it. Routing programs. another big change going from paper and pencil to the computerized system. Um, Car seat systems within the buses for our kids that have special needs. When I first started in the business, it was maybe like just a lap belt. Now you have integrated seats or add-on specialized seating, safety vests. So I've seen changes when it comes to that compartmentalization all over. I've seen changes in the number of children that we're transporting. When I first started in the business, very few special needs children were being transported, and that's just exploding. Another one is wheelchair securement. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember getting on the first special ed bus and the wheelchair, you basically backed it into the bus, and the child, instead of facing the front, they were sideways in the bus. So, that was another big change. And then alternative transportation. So a lot of
A lot of
changes.
changes. I mean, that's for sure. And the one that kind of makes me chuckle a little bit too. You talked about the camera systems, and I remember too. A lot of the cameras are coming out, and we're getting them in the buses, and drivers really struggled with that early on. And like you said, there I think the thought with many of them was, well, you're just watching me to try to get me in trouble. Where that has really now flipped. And like you said, if the cameras are not working, the drivers will come in and tell you, hey, my camera's not working, right? So again, it goes hand in hand, right? Where it's about safety for the students, of course. It's about what's going on the bus, what's not going on the bus, what is the driver doing. A lot of times the camera obviously will pick up. Obviously, it's not going to lie because it's telling you the story of what
Mhm.
happened or what didn't happen on there. And I think for the most part, drivers see that now and really want that camera system working. But the nice thing about it too that I like, or I don't get into it as much as I used to, but a lot of our managers like, is being able to see driver habits. It can tell you again a story of what happened, and maybe a driver was inattentive, right, and wasn't watching. So again, you can get a lot of information from that camera. So great to have in the school buses for sure.
Yeah, and you can use it for training as well. When you see something that a driver's doing, you bring that driver in and show them and talk through with them. How can we change this? How can we make it better for you, for the kids? We've also used it when we've had a behavior issue. We've taken it to the case manager, and they might pick up on something that we haven't picked up on.
Yeah, great tool, great resource. But yeah, all those things you pointed out, huge changes in our industry throughout the years for sure. You've seen a lot, been through a lot, so wealth of knowledge and experience on your end for sure. So one of the things that you reached out to me, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this, is debunking the myths of HIPAA. And I think for a lot of us, there's this thing out there, right? That we struggle to get information from the school district on our students, right? And a lot of times we'll ask for information and we'll get a reply back from the school district. Well, hey, that's HIPAA. And what we're just looking for is, what are things that we need to know to be able to safely transport the student? We don't want to know all the information. We understand that, and we don't need all that information. But can you walk us through again? You kind of threw some things out. There's a difference between HIPAA and I think FERPA and some of those things. What is what, and what do we need? What do we need to be able to do our job on our end?
Yep, great question. So we live in the world of acronyms to begin with. I was going through Linda Bluth's book recently, and I think I counted up just for myself 18 acronyms that we use in our industry. So what HIPAA is it's for the healthcare providers and the insurance companies. And this was something that was enacted back in 1996 to protect our medical information at the clinics and hospitals. And they talk about confidentiality. of that information. So I think people transfer that over into the transportation world. But where privacy really falls in with us in transportation is under IDEA, another acronym. It stands for Individuals with Disabilities Act. And that act actually dates back to 1974.
Oh, it goes back a long ways.
Yeah, goes back a long ways, and it's changed names along the way, but currently it's the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And what that act did is it ensured families that their children with disabilities would have the right to a free, appropriate public education and receive the accommodations that they needed. And then under IDEA is FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And what that does is that ensures families that their children's educational records, including the IEP, will be kept confidential. So that's where the confidential part comes in. And I think when we think about the IEP, we think about many times the medical things that we're doing within a school for a child, whether it be the medications, if they use a wheelchair, a walker, and that's where that we think back on the confidential piece of it. But it actually doesn't fall under HIPAA, it falls under IDEA and FERPA.
Okay, thank you for walking us through that. There's a lot there, so I appreciate the bullet points on that. So how or what do we do on our end? What does our conversation look like? And can you help us walk through for us because we're a contractor, just so everybody awares, you work for a school district. You guys do your own busing. So two different entities, if you will, but one world. We're doing the same thing. But how can we go back to the district if we get told, hey, this is HIPAA, and we can't tell you X? What can our conversation look like, Kayla, in response to that? Going, hey, we're not asking for X, but what we wanting or needing is Y. What does that look like? What does that sound like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just so that you know, it's not just a contractor who struggles getting that information. Even myself, working for the school district, struggled getting that information. Um, for an example, when I first came to Bemidji, I was getting the child's name and their address and the school that they were attending. That was it. And my first fall here didn't go so well
I can imagine.
because I was missing information.
Right.
So I went back to the special ed department, and this is what I'm going to recommend to anybody out there. Go to your special ed department, to the special ed director, ask for a meeting, sit down and have a cup of coffee, chat just like we are right now, and tell them why it's important that you gather this information, why you need it, why your drivers need it. And I always throw the question out there, would you put a child in a classroom that has a disability without the teacher having the information on them? Their answer is going to be no. So, yeah, so that's why we need that same information.
What can you just like really as tightly as you can? What is it that we need? Like what are the five, six things? Maybe it's three or four, I don't know, but what are the things that we truly need in order for us to safely do our job in transporting these students?
Um, I would say, first off, you obviously need to know where you're going to pick them up at and where you're going to drop them off at. What can you do that they have a positive ride on the bus? What might be some triggers? If you're dealing with a student that's autistic and routine is important for them, you need to know that if you veer off the route, they're probably going to have a meltdown. When you go to drop off a child at school or home, for us, it's important Does that child have to be a hand to hand with the parent and staff? Can we drop them off eye to eye, or can we just drop them off? Do they have a wheelchair that they use? Uh, do they have oxygen? What kind of equipment might we be looking at that we need to be prepared for? Because the last thing we want to do is come to the home and find out that we have a bus that can't accommodate a wheelchair and they're in a wheelchair. Kind of the same thing, going back, what does the teacher need to know?
Yeah, no, thanks for walking us through. And like you said, yeah, we said there's usually five, six things that we really need. And again, we're not asking for private information in order for us to safely do our job. But one thing that you did say, and I agree with this, and it's kind of I won't say an argument, but an argument that we'll have is so many times we don't know is if you go out of the routine, some of these students will react to that getting out of the routine, and usually in a negative way, right? That's just what happens. We need to know that, like, so that again we can stay consistent, give that student a good safe ride. But then within that, and you said this, is there a trigger word, or is there something that we can do to help pull them back, right? And again, that is so critical. And oftentimes we just don't know that. And if we simply know, hey, no, you can say this, phrase or say this word, and that student's going to kind of calm down and come back and settle down a little bit on the ride. So you said that, and it's just like, yeah, that's so simple. If we could just have that.
Yeah, it really is simple. And working with those case managers at school is important. When we have an issue with a child, we write them up on a referral form, it gets sent to the case manager, and sometimes they'll call us and say, oh, you know what? If you did this on the bus, they would be okay. Or if this happens, do this. The other thing that I do, I have found it's important for not only our riders, but for our drivers and pairs, is if there's an issue on the bus or the driver has a concern, I have them contact the case manager directly. And the reason I do that is I can call them, but then I end up being the middleman. And then they might ask a question that I can't answer. I have, in our district, I have found that allowing that relationship to be built between the case managers and our drivers and paras has really helped our kids. And I think it empowers our drivers and paras as well, that they know that I can go and ask that question.
Right. No, that's a great example, and maybe yeah, for a lot of folks that might be the way to go. So I appreciate you sharing that. Like again, here's another insight. Works good for you guys. It very well could work very well for another district or a contractor out there. So definitely would encourage people to look into that if that helps. So pivoting a little bit, as we all know, it's really really difficult to find drivers, right? In our industry, it's getting harder by the day, by the month, as we go along here. Could you share again from your expertise? Again, we have regular ed drivers and then we have special ed drivers. What is it that you look for that you would encourage people to look for when we're hiring a special ed driver? Are there certain things that you're looking for that you believe, hey, this person would be a good fit, this would be a good driver to drive these students?
I'm looking for that driver that has that compassion and that driver that can adjust to change day by day, minute by minute. And that's actually one of the questions that we ask in the interview is, how do you handle change? And then we ask, how do you handle working with irate parents?
Yeah.
And then what do you do if a child does have a meltdown? What would you do? So we kind of talk through that.
And try to find that good fit. Yeah, those people that kind of know what they're getting into, with being a special ed driver. And I will admit, that's probably not my strong suit, and that's okay, right? To be able to recognize that.
Yeah.
Um, it does take a special person, I do believe, to drive a special ed bus. You have to have, you said, that compassion, that empathy, patience, right? To wait out, sometimes a student that's having just a bad morning and wait it out and try to de escalate that situation and understanding that, the safety of the student comes first. And that means you get to the school 10 minutes late. That's okay, right? We want to get kids there safely, try to give them the best ride that we can. It's not always about running on time. If you can see a student's having a bad time, take the time to right to calm them down.
Exactly. And I tell our drivers that all the time. Yeah, you have a schedule, but if you need to be late, you're late because we want to get them there safe.
Exactly. So, what are there certain things that you guys do, Kayla, that you would be willing to share? Training for special ed drivers and maybe paras, if that's wrapped up into the same thing, that you guys do again that could be helpful to others.
So I have a saying that I can never blame a driver for doing something wrong if I haven't given them the tools.
True.
So I am a firm believer in extensive training. And yeah, we have a driver shortage, but I still think that it's important to take that extra time. So my special ed drivers and paras actually go through about 30 days of training.
Wow. Okay.
They ride on all of our special ed buses because every bus environment's a little bit different. Every driver and para do things a little differently. We do a lot of online training. So some of it's resources that I've just Googled. Some of it's sources within our school district that we use. We have a driver that the school district sent to get their CPI certification. So that driver takes off his driver's hat and puts on a CPI training hat, and he trains all of our drivers and paras. And I know I have talked to one other school district, or I'm sorry, one contractor who had their own person who was CPI certified. Um, so again, a lot of online training. I have my certification in car seat training on school buses and in type threes. And I would highly recommend that you either reach out to your local car seat techs or get somebody within your organization trained to help on that part of the training. Getting involved in the different organizations, whether it's within Minnesota or outside of Minnesota, because they have resources for training, but extensive training.
Extensive training. All right. Thank you for walking us through that. Can you clarify as well? We had talked about this on a couple emails back and forth with car seats. Again, Minnesota, but cold weather states. A lot of kids get on. They get the big snowsuits on and snow pants, and sometimes you're trying to get them strapped in, unstrapped. What is a good safe procedure when our folks encounter that for getting kids in and out again with all the snow gear on?
Yep. So what we do is we send a letter out to all of our parents in the fall of the year and just remind them that once they start putting snowsuits and have the heavy winter jackets on their children, that we're going to take that jacket off when they get in the bus and get them strapped in. And then we ask them not to put snow pants on them because we want to make sure those harnesses are close to their body as possible. In many cases, the parents, if they've gone through a car seat check or a clinic, they already know that they want to remove that bulky clothing.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And that was something that again you and I went back and forth in a very positive way in an email, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on that today. And I want to point out maybe going to an IEP meeting. That would be a great place to have that conversation too, right? If we're a part of that IEP meeting, we on our side can talk about, hey, some do's or don'ts with the student coming into special ed transportation. So with an IEP meeting, let me ask this: how do we get to be a part of the IEP meeting? This is a thing that's just everybody in our industry, I think, is like, I never get called, I never get asked. Again, if we were part of that, we could have these communications early on to sometimes avoid, things that are more on the negative side later on. If we could have those early on
Yeah.
conversations, but any insight on how we can get a part of the IEP meeting?
That's a great question. And it's amazing. After all these years, I still hear across the nation that people aren't getting invited to the IEP meetings. And I think it goes back to building that relationship first with your special ed director within your district, and then give them a criteria of when you want to be invited to an IEP meeting. I always say nothing about us without us.
There you go. I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
There you go right ahead because I stole it from somebody.
That's usually how it works.
uh, but I have a criteria that I ask them if you have a child that is new to the district and they have high needs or they have specialized equipment, I want to be included at that meeting. Maybe they have an altered day. And I used to say, put me at the beginning of that meeting. We'll talk about transportation and then I'll leave. But I've changed my philosophy over that the last few years. I stay for the whole meeting because sometimes I pick up little tips along the way that help us in the bus. And then I'll repeat it back at the meeting saying, hey, you said that they like SpongeBob. So if we have a SpongeBob book for them on the book or on the bus, will that help? And I can then take that back to our staff.
I like that. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, you're right. I think it's important that we have to make those phone calls a lot of times, and if I can say it this way, strongly insist that we really need to be a part of the IEP. Again, I know we're going to agree. Everyone out there is, if we can get as much right from that early meeting, it just helps so much more, on the backside when the transportation actually begins, when we put them on a route and that first morning pickup, right? So a lot of positives can just come from being a part of that meeting.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that you have to get parent buy-in. So if you're having issues with a child or you have questions, it doesn't hurt to remind the parent that the next time you have an IEP meeting, can you make sure that I'm invited to it? And sometimes the parents assume that you've been invited. So I think building that relationship with them and reminding them, I'd like to be there.
Yeah, and that I've heard that many times throughout the years from managers, is they'll get a call from an upset parent going, well, I told the district this, and because we weren't at the IEP meeting and nobody from the district, I'm not pointing fingers, this is what happens. A phone call didn't come our way to say, hey, there was a change, or there was this or this with student X. And so we're trying to have this conversation now with an upset parent who, like you said, probably assumes that we know this or we're supposed to know it. And this is the first time we're hearing it. So
Yeah. And I think it's important when you're working with your school that they understand that you know that you're part of the process, that if transportation is an accommodation, you should be at that meeting. But I think it's also important for all of us to remind the schools that we understand about the confidentiality of the information we're getting and know that we're going back and training our drivers on what's confidential, what they can talk about in the office, how they have to maintain records and destroy records. And I think that helps to reassure that we're going to do the proper thing with our data.
yeah, and I think another point to that too, Kayla, is, again, if you can build that communication and that trust with the district, and just say it's the site manager, and just because it's talked about in that meeting, if they trust the site manager and that they know that he or she's not going to go back and repeat all of that, because there are probably things that are talked about that it is private, but it has nothing to do with transportation. We're not going to go back and have that conversation with the driver. We're only going to tell our staff what they truly need to know. And if it's not pertinent to the transportation, it's not going to get talked about. But again, you have to build that trust.
Yeah, exactly. See, now you said I'm the expert. You get it.
No. You're the expert. I don't get it. I just sometimes I'm just talking and I think I sound smart.
I think the other thing you asked a question earlier about training. And one of the things that I do in August when we do our training is I'll pull in staff from our special ed department. Like this year, we're going to do EBD training and autism training. And I think having those case managers come in and doing that training, they hear the questions drivers are asking and they realize the importance that the drivers have the information that they need.
Yeah. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And it's something I know we really encourage my guests as other contractors do too. Is again, pull in the experts. If you call the district, I would say 9 times out of 10, I would love to say 10 out of 10, they're gonna show up and do the training for you guys. Again, they're the experts, right? Call them in.
Right.
Again, build that trust. I mean, that's what you're doing in doing that as well. Is getting that bridge built. So yeah, no, great insight on that. Let's talk about, again, maybe a couple minutes of the complexities of special ed transportation. And it really does start at that IEP meeting, right? That's where it starts. And then you got to get them on a route, and it's the timing. And then sometimes what happens is kids come in and out of special ed transportation, and you might have the route all set and it's been going really good for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden you get a new student, and that new student has to fit somewhere maybe in the middle, which then throws off the timing of all the other pickups, right?
Mhm.
That's happening. And sometimes it could throw it off. Maybe it's 3 minutes, but it could be 12 minutes. And now you're calling a parent going, hey, just so you know, starting next Monday, the bus is going to show up 12 minutes later. And the parent's not really happy because they have to leave for work. And right, so there's complexities. It's not like you just put a kid on a special ed route and everything's, unicorns and everything else. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
So maybe again, from your end, the years that you've been doing it, the complexities of special ed transportation, and maybe things that we can do to help with that or make it easier.
So one of the things that I do in the fall of the year, or when we get a student during the year, I actually have a brochure that I send out to them. And it addresses in there that the routes can change based on ridership. And I think communicating, at least for me, communicating that early on with parents, they have a tendency to not get as upset when we have to make a change. And I think those drivers building that relationship with the families. I work really hard when I'm routing students to look at how is this going to impact the rest of the bus. And if there is a big impact, then we make sure we allow enough time that we can notify everybody. And if we have to go back and make a little adjustment, and we can, then we'll go ahead and do it.
Yeah, again, I think we all really try to keep that consistency as much as we possibly can, knowing the needs of the students, right? And just those little things sometimes can really throw them off. But unfortunately, yeah, sometimes there's maybe a bigger major thing that happens on a route, which really turns it upside down. And again, you want to try to communicate that with parents as best that you can. Ahead, a week is great, right? If you can tell them, hey, starting next week or whatever that is. But yeah, no parent likes to call the day before or 2 days before.
Right. And I'm a firm believer, giving them plenty of time.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. So yeah, we do the best we can with that. So I got a question in here, and I don't want to go into the weeds of it, but it's something that's really, really talked about in today's world of where we're at. And you mentioned it before, where you started many years ago. There wasn't a lot of ridership with special ed transportation students. And today it is, I think it's 20% of kids that ride a bus or type 3 van services in Minnesota a little over 20% are special needs students. So the numbers continue to grow and grow. You and I know that. Um, what do you have an opinion? Just an opinion. I'm just curious of why do we keep seeing these numbers increase the way that we are? Because now I think CDC said I think it's 1 in 34 students that
Yes.
are been identified with autism, and there's some other things in there too. But any thoughts or opinions on that, Kayla?
Well, a couple of things. First off, back in, I think it was 2004, they started this. It's called Grow With Me. I don't know if you heard that or not, heard about that. But what that was school districts identifying students sooner and at an earlier age and giving parents the resources that they needed if their child had special needs. And it actually went back to before the child was even born. And what it was is the doctors would refer children to the school district or a parent who is pregnant and maybe they knew that there was going to be some disability when that child was born. So we are identifying children before they're even born. We're identifying them much earlier. And I think many of these disabilities, especially autism, it's been there for years when I was growing up, but we didn't identify it like we're identifying it now. And even when it comes to autism, that spectrum has just changed so much over the last probably 15 years.
So, is there anything that would be helpful, beneficial? Because some of the things I read, right, you just read things, right? You try to gather
Mhm.
information and learn and this and that. And I'm not saying everything I read is accurate and 100% and this and that. And but to your point, I think there's an understanding or learning now where genetics and a lot of times the what maybe mom is eating during pregnancy is maybe being attributed now to some of this. So how do we unwind these numbers? Is there anything? I don't know. It's just it seems 1 in 34 is concerning.
It is. And I really don't know if there is a rewind or unwind button. But I think we all need to be prepared that those numbers are going to get even higher. I know just alone in our district, we have about 1,400 students that have been identified with some kind of special need, and we transport only about 200 of them.
Wow. Yeah, like I said, it's. I'm just curious, right? You've been doing this a long time, and I have to ask the question. Lots of people have different opinions on this subject matter, but I wouldn't be doing justice here without asking the question. So I appreciate your opinion and insight on that too. Um, Talking about the increasing of the number of kids in special ed transportation here in Minnesota, nationwide. Let's talk about the financial side. There's a financial side to this. There always is, right? Our Governor Walz, has proposed a budget, just a proposal at this point. But it looks like there's some pretty steep cuts to special ed transportation over the next couple of years if it was to get through with his proposal of up to 10% and decreased funding. Who knows what's going to happen out in Washington, D.C. with the Department of Education, right? There's things happening out there. So, again, just there's a lot of moving components and parts to this. But again, from your years in the industry doing this, Kayla, what does this mean? Like, what a 10% decrease again? If I understand it's an if, but any kind of probably defunding. What does that mean for special ed in Minnesota?
I'm worried about it too. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about it is that, again, going back to IDEA, we're mandated to transport students with special needs if it's in their IEP as an accommodation. Um, I like to think that everybody is doing their best to be fiscally responsible and running a tight ship when it comes to special needs. So I'm concerned not only from the federal level, but the state, because our funds come from the state and they trickle down, or excuse me, our funds come from the feds and trickle down into the state. So if we're going to have budget cuts within the state, what does that mean on the federal end of it? Are they talking about increasing those funds and just haven't told us? I think it's something we should all be concerned about because special needs is increasing, not going away. We have to transport them. And if you're cutting our funds, but we're required to transport 'em, how are we going to pay for it? And that's the piece I haven't had or heard the answer for yet.
Yeah, no, and spot on. And I think we're all of us sitting here in the industry in Minnesota. It doesn't matter if you're on the school district side of transportation or a contractor. It's going to affect all of us. And like you said, at the end of the day, we are legally responsible, mandated to transport these students. So the dollars have to come from somewhere. And I know I won't speak for the superintendents, but it's usually what you hear from them is, I'm going to take the dollars out of the general fund right now, and so there's the shell game, and there's the guessing game of what's the next 2 years going to look like for funding. So it's just a lot there. I think everybody's a little bit on eggshells here, waiting to see what's going to come out of St. Paul here in probably the next 60, 90 days if they ever get their
Yeah.
act together,
Yeah.
or all of them. So yeah.
Yeah, it's scary right now. And the people in the end that are going to be hurt are going to be our kids and families.
Yeah, and I was ready to say the same thing. Is at the end of it, it's the students and the moms and dads. At the end of the day, they're going to be affected by it, and they, we need to pick up kids, get them to their education, and mom and dad need to get to their jobs, right? And if we're not there to do that, again, you talk about a trickle down. That's not even a trickle down. That's devastating. If there's no
Right.
bus, no ride to pick up a student, what are mom and dad supposed to do, right? And
Right.
so, yeah, it's a lot of negatives within that. So appreciate, yeah, again, your thoughts on that, and we'll see what happens here. We're always waiting, it seems like, to see what happens, right? So let me ask this. We'll kind of start winding down here a little bit. If you were able to make a change, just one thing, if I could just change one thing in special ed transportation, what would it be?
Oh, it's always going to go back to transportation having a seat at the table. I am such a firm believer in building that relationship, and it's more about transportation being at that table. It is so important, and I think we're forgotten about.
Yeah. You're talking about
And
like at
that's
that
what I would
getting
like.
to that IEP, like we are part of that IEP right from the beginning. Make sure somebody from transportation is here.
Exactly. That's my goal.
Yeah, well, whatever I can do, we can do to help support that. We will. We had our winter conference, the MSBOA. We had our winter conference back in late January. I'm up in St. Cloud, and there was a couple gals that came from a school district and did a special ed presentation for us. They did a wonderful, wonderful job, and got all done. And they were kind enough to do some Q&A with us. And sure enough, hands are going up. And one of the very first questions out of it was, how do we get part of the IEP meeting? And it wasn't part of their thing that they were doing, but again, just it's special ed, right? And it's always that piece. And they were just like kind of like what we're talking about. You have to go back to your district and have that conversation. Try to get into the meeting, get your foot in the door, to be a part of that. So again, I think we agree across the board. We need to be. We want to be a part of that. So again, whatever doors I can help you kick in, I am certainly willing to do that with you. So
Oh, that's great.
yeah. Um, is there anything too that would jump to your mind that we can be doing to be more efficient? I think from a safety, my opinion, safety side, I think we do really good as school districts and or contractors and what we're doing. There's so much new safety, and you hit so many of those things from the very beginning, the safety upgrades that have happened in our industry. So again, the yellow school bus is really, really, really safe. I'm not too concerned there. But on an efficiency side, are there things that you would have an opinion of? Hey, we could do some things a little bit better to be more efficient in our industry on that end.
I think it's about always going back and looking, always going back and re-looking at those routes. And I actually like to include my drivers in those route decisions because it's easy for me to sit at the computer and do their route. But they're the ones that are out there and they see those traffic patterns and they know how long it takes a child to, maybe load onto the bus or bring them out from school. So, it always goes back to that communicating with everybody that's involved in the process.
Yeah, no, that is great insight, and I think again, talking like me talking to you this morning, I'm talking to an expert. No better expert about a route than the driver. Pull them in, right? To your points, they understand traffic patterns. They're like, no, you don't want to go to this light because if you get stuck at this light, it doesn't change for 3 minutes, right? You sit there, and 3 minutes in our world is a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
You can go this way and this way and make a couple turns to avoid that intersection. So yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And I think, the other thing is that we have a driver shortage out there and I don't see it going away. And I'd like to think that because of that shortage of drivers, we're already tight on those routes. We're already doing the best that we can and we're making them efficient routes.
yeah. And that's a great point. And this is for everybody to know. It doesn't matter again if you doing it on the district side, if you've hired a contractor, we have to be efficient. And mainly for that reason alone is that there isn't enough drivers. So there's no extra routes. I can assure people out there that are running around. We're being as efficient as we can. So yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think contractors and on the district side, we all look at that. How can we be the most efficient?
yeah, we need to be for sure. So let's we'll kind of close up here, Kayla. Is there anything that we maybe missed that I didn't ask that you would like to address or throw out? Like, well, hey, there's one more thing.
No, I think we've covered, everything.
Awesome. All right.
I could sit and talk to you for hours about this, but we don't have that much time.
No, we can do this again because you still have more time. I think you might have plans on the horizon, possibly of doing
Yeah,
something different.
in October, I'll be retiring. Um, and I'm looking at trying to reinvent myself. I'm ready to give up the day to day, but I'm not ready to walk away from the special ed transportation. I think that there's still a lot that I can do out there, and I want to be able to help contractors and school districts and families to address some of the things that we've talked about today. So, hold on, you might see me even after next October out there doing something.
I I I would welcome that. I think again, with your level of expertise, you have more to give and to offer to our industry. Whether it be a guest speaker, somebody coming in and helping with training. Um, there's an abundance of knowledge that we all need from people like you. So, yeah, I appreciate hearing that. I think many others will appreciate hearing that as well. And I waited till the end to do this because you had shared with me kind of what your plans were. So, what do you like to do outside of work then? I mean, I know you might still be doing some things, but what is it that you like to do? Hobbies? Hey, when I'm not here, this is what I enjoy to do.
Yeah, so I love being with my family. My children don't live real close to me as well as my grandchildren. So when I have the opportunity to be with them, I love being with them, spending that time with them. My husband is an avid fisherman. So I'm looking forward to when I retire that I can spend more time out in the boat with him in the summertime.
Okay.
I'd like to garden and I love to travel.
There you go. All right. Well, I wish you the best in all of those things and that you're able to spend more time, yeah, doing some fishing, some gardening, spending time with the kids, grandkids, all of that when you get to that retirement point. But it's not a full retirement. So
Right.
again, yeah, wish you all the best in that arena as well. So the morning route, as you know too, Kayla, is all about coffee. As we know, our drivers, when they come in, even ourselves, man, to get going here, we need a cup of coffee, maybe two, right before those buses leave the bus barn, and we get behind the computer and do dispatching and all that good stuff. So with coffee, though, my last question to you is, if you had an opportunity, you could pick one person, sit down and share a cup of coffee with somebody that you've just admired. It doesn't matter what point of history, somebody that a quote that inspired you. Something that just means a lot to you that, I just would love to have a cup of coffee with them. Who would that person be?
Um, I think it's the person that got me started in this business. They're no longer with us. That was actually two people, Leo Moran and Jack Wickland. I'd love to sit down with them and talk about how things have changed and how hopefully they've seen me grow. I've made mistakes along the way, but that's who I'd like to sit down with.
That's awesome. I appreciate that, Leo and Jack. I'm sure they would be astounded from those many years ago to where we're at today, just like we are as well, of the changes in transportation, especially within special ed transportation. So no, thank you for sharing that with us as well. So again, thank you for the time here this morning. We will definitely need to do this again. Maybe after the budget comes out and it's released, and where do we go from here, and what does it mean for us here in Minnesota? So we may be circling back sooner than later, who knows? But Kayla, I appreciate all the insight, the wisdom that we are able to take from you today. Appreciate your time as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Stay up to date with the podcast by following us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to the Morning Route Podcast YouTube channel.